Okay, so let's take a look at the Korg MS-10 envelope generator. Now the Korg MS-10 envelope generator, it is hardwired to apply to the amplifier. So it is basically set to control changes in volume over time. However, the MS-10 does also allow us to use the envelope generator to control changes in time, or changes over time, in the pitch. So the envelope generator can be applied to the oscillator, the voltage controlled oscillator. We can also apply the envelope generator to the filter so that we can make changes over time in the timbre by changing the frequency cutoff point over time. And I'll give examples of each one of these. So let us first discuss the four, well actually on the MS-10 there are 5 stages of the envelope generator, but there are commonly 4. So let's look at each of these. I'm actually going to start with the second button down here, or the second pot. This is what's known as the attack time, and you can check out hongsongs.com. I have another video that's dedicated specifically to the attack time, and I'll be producing other videos dedicated to some of these other aspects later, so check back later at www.hongsongs.com. So the first stage typically of an envelope generator is the attack time. Next we have a decay time, a sustain level, a release time, and then the MS-10, the Korg MS-10 also has a hold time, and I'm going to go through each one of these. Now the first 4 that I mentioned, the attack, decay, sustain, and release, make up the well-known acronym ADSR envelope generator. Attack, decay, sustain, and release. ADSR. And if you look, I've created a graphic representation of this. ADSR. Attack, decay, sustain, release. So as you can see, here says key on, but it could be any trigger. It does not have to be the keyboard key, but sometimes we can use other triggers to create sounds or to generate sounds on the synthesizer. But when you press the key on, or whatever trigger it is, well, first of all, this is a graphic representation of volume versus time. So when we're talking about volume, we're talking about the envelope generator, or the envelope applied to the voltage controlled amplifier. So the amplifier, once again, controls the volume. So that as you go up, it's a greater volume. This is time. And this is not drawn to scale. This is just to give an idea of the contour. But so when you press the key on, the first stage of this ADSR envelope generator is the attack time. The attack time is the rate at which the volume climbs from 0 or silent before the key is pressed to once the key is pressed. You can determine the rate at which the volume goes up to its maximum volume. So this is the attack time, from 0 volume to maximum volume. The attack time determines how long that's going to take. Now again, on analog synthesizers, you know, you can change it from quick to slow, or faster to slow, or instantaneous to slow. On digital synthesizers, you can actually determine the exact time here in milliseconds or seconds, or whatever the case may be. But anyway, so the attack, from the time you press the key, the attack time, the time it takes to go from 0 volume up to the maximum volume. The next stage of this envelope or contour is D, the decay. This determines the rate at which the volume drops from the maximum volume down to the sustain level. Okay, so the attack and the decay are times. These are expressed in terms of time. Sustain is actually a level. It's a volume level. Okay, so if the sustain level is something less than the maximum, so if it's at 80% or 90% or anything below 100%, or on the, let's see, on the Korg MS-10, you've got from 0 up to 10 sustain level. So if it's anywhere other than all the way clockwise, then the sustain level is less than the maximum, and there's going to be a time, we can determine the time that it goes from the maximum volume back down to, or down to the sustain level. And as long as we continue to hold the key, the note will be held out at that same volume, whatever the sustain level is set to. When we release the key or other trigger, then there's a release time. The release time is the time that it takes, or the rate at which the volume will drop from the sustain level, whatever we have that set at, back down to 0. So let's go through this once again. Attack, decay, sustain, release determines the contour of the changes in volume over time when it's applied to an amplifier. And again, we can also apply this to the filter and the oscillator for changes in timbre and pitch respectively. So you hit the key, there's some time it takes to get to the maximum volume, decays down to, once it hits that maximum volume, it immediately begins to decay down to the sustain level, which it remains at until the key is released, and then it drops back down to 0. Okay, now again, this is based on the assumption that the sustain level is somewhat less than 100%, or somewhat less than 10 here. Okay. If it is set at 10, if the sustain level is set at 10, it's at, or at maximum, depending on which keyboard we're talking about, then this is what your envelope would look like. This is an attack, decay, sustain, release envelope generator. Remember, us synthesists have these acronyms that we use, so learn them. Be cool. ADSR, attack, decay, sustain, release, EG, envelope generator. Okay, when the sustain level is at the maximum volume, which on the Korg MS-10 is 10, when that's the case, the sustain level is maximum, the decay time becomes irrelevant, because there's no decay from the maximum volume to the sustain level. It's the same thing. So the decay time has no meaning or cannot be observed when the sustain level is set to the maximum. So what you have here instead is you key on, attack time takes you up to that maximum level, which is the same as the sustain level, so it stays there. There's no decay until you release the key or other trigger, and then it drops back down. The release time determines the rate at which that volume drops back down to 0. Okay, so we're looking at a 0 volume before a key is hit or trigger. Key is pressed. This jumps up to the maximum level, or the sustain level in this case, which they're equal. You release the key, and then that's the rate at which it drops back down to 0. Okay, let's look at another chart here. So here's the original chart that we looked at. Here we had the attack, decay, sustain, release. Let's look at the Korg. As I said, the Korg MS-10 has an additional stage here. That's the hold. And again, this is something that's expressed in time. Everything in here, the attack, the decay, the release, and the hold are all expressed in terms of time, or a rate of time, a rate of change. Sustain is a level. When it's applied to an amplifier or voltage controlled amplifier, the sustain determines the volume at which the note holds until you release the key. If it's applied to a filter, then the sustain level is the frequency cutoff point. If it's applied to the oscillator, the sustain level is the pitch, you know, which pitch would be here. Okay, so on the Korg MS-10, 0 volume before a key is depressed, key on, you've got your attack time, goes up to the maximum volume. Again, here we're assuming that the sustain level is something less than 10 or less than maximum. So then after, as soon as it hits that maximum volume, the decay determines the rate at which the volume drops down to the sustain level. Now with this hold, which is the extra feature on the Korg envelope generator, key off does not instantaneously result in the drop in volume going back to 0. Instead, the hold determines how long after you release the key the sustain will continue before it begins to drop down to 0 at the rate determined by the release time. So basically, key on, volume shoots up to the maximum, drops back down to the sustain level, assuming it's something less than 10. And if it were 10, then it would just stay up here. Once the key is released, it stays at that level, the sustain level, during whatever the hold time is set at. And then after that hold time expires, the volume will drop back down to 0 at a rate determined by where we have our release set. So now that we've looked at the graphic representations, let's see some of this in action on the Korg. Okay, now again, the Korg envelope generator by default or by hardwiring internally is set to control the amplifier. So let's first get a note here. Okay, so what we're going to do, we've got a couple different things here. First, we're going to look at an envelope with a fast attack time. That's your A from ADSR. A medium decay time. Sustain level something less than the maximum volume, so that we can hear each stage here. And remember, if the sustain is set to the maximum, we're not going to hear anything happening with the decay time. It will become irrelevant. So we're going to set the sustain level something less than the maximum volume, and then we're going to set a slow release. Here's what it looks like graphically. Fast attack, medium decay, we're at the sustain level, release the key, and a long release time. So let's look at how we set that. When the attack time is set at 0, you're going to get instantaneous climb from 0 to maximum. Let's give it a little bit here. Well, something about 1.5 I've got it set at is your attack time. So the medium decay time, we're going to put that at about around 5. That's about medium, between on a scale of 1 to 10. And then the sustain level, we're going to put it at, I'll put it at about 5, 6. And then a release time, we're going to have a long release time. So let's look at this. This is, picture this, fast attack time, medium release, or decay, sustain level, key off, slow release. Let's see what that sounds like. Okay, let's hear that again, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to call out what stage I'm at. So right now we're at a 0 volume. I'm going to depress the key, and you're going to hear a very quick climb. I'm going to turn the sustain down a little bit more so you can hear the difference between the maximum and the sustain. So when I hit the key, listen for a fast attack time, a medium drop from the highest volume back down to the sustain level, and then when I release the key, listen to how long it takes to drop back down to 0. So we heard a fast attack. Now we're down to the sustain level. I'm going to release the key, and it takes some time to diminish down to 0. That's a long release time. Okay? And that's what this envelope looks like. That's that long release time that we just heard. Okay, let's try something different. So now this envelope has a slow attack time. Keep that medium decay time. and then the sustain is something less than the maximum, and then the release time is going to be fast. So what I'm going to do is I'll leave the decay time the same as before. Decay time is at about 5, which is our medium. Sustain is at about 5, so it's less than maximum. Now I'm going to change the attack time from a fairly fast attack time to a long or a slow attack time. It's at about 9, 10 is the maximum, but I'm putting it at about 9. And then the release time I'm going to change from a long or maximum release time. We're going to change that back down to a fairly fast attack time. So now this is what it should look like. It takes a gradual build from 0 or from silent up to the maximum volume. A little bit quicker decay back down to the sustain. We're going to hold that, and once I release the key, you're going to hear that drop out much quicker than it did with the other settings. So here we go. Key on. It's a longer build. And once it gets to that maximum, I'm still holding the key, but you're going to hear it drop down in volume a little bit. I'm still holding the key, but you just heard that decay. That was the decay. Now it's holding constantly at the sustain until I release. Very quick decrease from the sustain level down to 0. Let's check that out again. Key on, almost nothing at first. You hear this is a slow attack time, still building to the maximum, not yet there. Now you just heard that decay, so it took a while to get to the maximum, fairly quick decay. Now it's at the sustain level. I'm still holding down the key. I'm going to release it. Goes out almost instantaneously. Okay, let's give it a little bit longer release time, a little bit shorter attack, but we're still at the attack is still greater than medium, so we'll call that a fairly slower attack time. Still at a medium decay. Our sustain is still something less than 10. In this case, it's halfway up, is about 5, and then I'm going to give it a little bit longer of a release time, and let's hear what that sounds like. Key on. You're at the maximum. Decays back down. I'm going to release it. Takes a little bit longer to diminish back down to 0. Okay, so I think you should be starting to get the picture here how this works. Now let's look at what happens when you've got, let's see what else I have. Okay, let's look at this envelope. This envelope has a fast attack time, a slow decay time, so I'm going to change the decay time. We had it set at about medium, but I'm going to turn that up, turn up the rate. Sustain, once again, we'll keep it at something less than the maximum volume, and then we'll have a fast release time again. So you're going to have a fast attack time, key on, it gets to that maximum fairly quickly, then it's going to take a longer time to get down to your sustain level. So you're going to hear, gets up to maximum pretty quick, you'll hear a gradual decay, but then at some point it's gonna level out at whatever the sustain level's at, and then when I release the key, it's gonna go out quickly. So let's look at our settings. Fast attack time, I'll put it at about 2. I'm gonna put the decay time all the way up. We'll put it at 10. Sustain, once again, is less than maximum. Give it a fast release time. Set it at about 2, which is where we're at on the attack. So, here we go. It's decaying right now. We're listening to a decay. It's gradually fading, but it's not going to fade out all the way until after I release the key. It's going to level out at our sustain level, wherever we have that set, and in this case it's set at about halfway. I think it's at the sustain level now. I'm going to release it, and you'll hear a fast release time. One more time. Key on. Hits the maximum right away. Begins to decay fairly quickly, but the decay itself takes a long time. And it will continue to decay until it hits the sustain level, which it will hold until, as long as I hold the key. Then when I release it, release.